God's not done with you. That's the message from Bonnie Sorenson on the latest episode of A Widow's Heart. Bonnie will encourage you with her story of being a pastor's wife and how God held her even after his death.
I had our pastor at the time tell me, the church could heal because we watched you heal, which is, nothing about me, but it's just God's grace in my life.
She's accomplished so much and will lift you up with her story of his faithfulness and goodness through it all. I'm Pam Lundell, and this is A Widow's Heart. Well, welcome to A Widow's Heart, another episode, another incredible God story. I'm excited to introduce to you Bonnie Sorenson. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Pam. Glad to be here.
Before we get to everything that you are accomplishing in your life and how God's been working in your life through the unimaginable, I just want to let our listeners know that you're quite amazing, all of the guests that I've had, but your areas of expertise, including being a doctorate in nursing, a master's degree in pastoral care and counseling, health and wellness coach, and a Praise Moves instructor. We're going to find out what that is a little bit later on, too, because all of this pretty much happened after the death of your husband, correct, Brian?
Yes. I became a nurse practitioner about a year and a half before he died, which was a God thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, too.
Yeah. So I just want to, just be sensitive to you and where you want to start. But I have to tell you, Bonnie, she doesn't look a day over 35. So I don't know how all of this happened. But if you care to share a little bit about your husband, Brian, you have a beautiful big family too, right?
Yes.
Tell us about that and just a little bit of your story.
Sure. So I married very young, right out of high school. I was 18 and Brian was about 4.5 to 5 years older than me, 5 years ahead of me in school. We knew right away that we were called to ministry. So he was a wildlife biologist at the time. We got married, but we went off to a little Bible school out in Montana that doesn't even exist anymore. I should say we met and married in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. So Minnesota's home. Mm-hmm. Probably 13 months later, we had our first baby. So I was not quite 20 when I had my first child. And we went off to Trinity Bible College, where he went back to school and got his ministerial degree.
Amazing. And what was he before that?
A wildlife biologist.
Now, how do you make that? How do you hear that call from a wildlife biologist to being a pastor?
It's pretty interesting because he would have been totally happy out in the woods living all by himself. He had a picture of a horse in a trailer, and that would have been his life. But the call of God is something that's stronger than even our own desires sometimes. But when we met and got married, we both felt a call to ministry. I felt like I was called to ministry ever since I was a little girl, ever since I got saved at maybe 5 or 6 years old. I just knew God had a plan. So anyway, he just followed the call and finished Bible college and was a youth pastor for several years and then became a lead pastor. And before he died, we were up in northern Minnesota for over 20 years.
Yeah, Grand Rapids, right?
Yep, Grand Rapids. He pastored there for 13 years and Floodwood, Minnesota for 7 years before that.
Oh, that's incredible. And you were a pastor's wife with everything that goes along with that, right? What were some of the things that you did alongside your husband?
Oh, it's kind of like, what didn't I do? So I taught a lot of Sunday school classes, led Bible studies, played on the worship team. One great thing that we did up north in Grand Rapids was Easter musicals. For our little church, we put on awesome Easter musicals for a few years, and I was a big part of that. I actually directed a couple of them, and there was just a lot of ministry. And once I started working, the ministry really didn't quit. I was pretty busy with young kids, church, and trying to work part-time as well.
How many children did you have?
Six
kids.
Yes.
And managing all that, you're an absolute wonder.
Well,
and for those listening, we're so glad that you're here. And I just want to tell you that in Minnesota, Twin Cities, where we're based right here, anything north of Minneapolis, St. Paul is called up north.
Yes. Absolutely. We were actually on the edge of Derange. So,
Derange,
Derange, so, yes.
The North Shore with Lutsen and Grand Marais. I call it the Scandinavian Riviera.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So you're in Grand Rapids and you're living an incredible life of ministry alongside your husband. And then the unthinkable happened. And as I always say, if you care to share whatever. It's not the how or the why, but the imprint they left on your heart. Can you tell us about losing your husband?
Yeah. So obviously it was a shock. He died suddenly of a heart attack one Friday evening. Not expected at all, except he did have some health issues. He had diabetes and kind of the whole metabolic syndrome and was trying to take care of himself. But there was no hint that he had heart disease other than, of course, being in the medical field, I know that we treat people with diabetes as if have heart disease. And the interesting thing for him was he was scheduled for a stress test, I think a week or two before he died, and ended up canceling it due to a meeting or something, and then had rescheduled. So he was on the books to get his heart checked out. So the night he died, we had gone out for supper, he and I together. He went home ahead of me. He was going to go home and turn on a movie and fall asleep. He had a slight cold, so I ran to the store to get him some medicine. And my oldest daughter was home at the time, and he had called up to her and said, "Who's here?" And she said, "It's me." And anyway,
I love that in a big family.
Yeah, in a big family.
And
she was the only one home. She was older, and just a side note, had been gone for a few years serving in Bogota, Colombia, and was actually home and felt like she needed to be home, which turned out to be a God thing as well. But anyway, she went downstairs and found him. And I got home a few minutes later, and she was on the phone with EMS. And, of course, it was tragic and traumatic, making calls to the other kids. My youngest son and youngest daughter were a senior in high school and 10 years old, respectively. And so rounded up those kids and met everybody at the hospital. And I knew he was gone when I saw him. And it was just sort of, oh, what do we do? You know?
Isn't it amazing? And it's so awful to just go back to that day because it's so shocking, but how God gives us somehow the power or the wherewithal to move through and do those things. And especially as a mom, you're like falling apart inside, but it's like, I've got these kids I've got to take care of too. So how did you deal with that? So
that was honestly the hardest part, you know, and even though it's been 11 years now, I still see the jacket I was wearing. I still see the floor. I still see myself on the phone calling the kids. That was the hardest at the time. And just trying to figure out, what are we going to do now? How are we going to handle this? And it was amazing. God was there. People showed up in the emergency room. I saw black and orange jackets lining the hall. Grand Rapids colors are black and orange. Okay. And some of my son's teammates were lined up in the hall just trying to support him. It still chokes me up when I think about it. Just as word got out, people showed up from all over just to support us.
You know, and I think about you, and, you know, I've lost a husband, and we know what that shock is going through that particular situation, and each story is so unique, as we're going to continue to hear about yours. But Bonnie, not only did you lose a husband, but your church lost a pastor.
Yes.
How did that come about or work out?
So that, you know, that was really neat how the Lord worked that out. Being the pastor's wife, it's a unique relationship, obviously, for
You're used
for those
to taking
of us.
care of so many.
Yeah, and just being a part of everything. And it's like, now what's going to happen? We had a wonderful youth pastor at the time who ended up becoming the lead pastor, which was really, really neat. I remember walking into the church probably a few days after Brian passed away and broke down in his arms, literally. And it was because that was the essence of who he was. You know, it's God's church, obviously, but this is where life was. This was where he ministered, where we ministered, where the people that loved him were. And it was just a really, really tough thing. I will tell you, though, that the church was very, very accepting and sensitive to me as the pastor's wife, who was no longer the pastor's wife. And I had our pastor at the time, Pastor Jason, who's still pastoring in Grand Rapids now, tell me, you know, the church could heal because we watched you heal, which is, you know, nothing about me, but it's just God's grace in my life and how God just protected the church through all that.
After that, I know those days, you know, just moments and days after losing your husband, you go through this surreal situation of planning a service. I think it's getting a little, now people are doing it a month or 2 months later or something, a memorial service. I love that. Was your service right away?
It was within a week and a half. And it was really special. We had our district, my husband was an Assemblies of God minister. And so we had a lot of the ministers from Minnesota and even some from Wisconsin where we served came, and it almost felt like military honors. They all sat together. They all honored him. And there were over 800 people in our little 200 to 300 seat sanctuary just honoring him.
Right.
And it was really neat, really special. All of my children, except my older daughter, who is pretty much an introvert, but she wrote something, and one of my daughter-in-laws read what she wrote. But otherwise, all 6 children, including my 10-year-old, spoke at the funeral, and a couple of them even sang. So it was just a very, very special, honoring time. And after that, as we're walking out of the sanctuary, it was that sense of, now what? Now what?
Now what? So what was it? I want to ask you, was it Mr. Rogers? Some people attribute the quote to him, but it's actually his mother who told him when he was a little boy, when something catastrophic happens, always look for the helpers.
Yeah.
So who were your helpers in those first weeks and months?
Oh, I had a lot of helpers. I had some very, very close friends, which was really a blessing. You know, there's mixed thoughts on who you should have as friends when you're in the ministry, but I had a couple of girlfriends that were really, really close. Yeah. We had ministry friends, and I would say for months afterwards, I would get cards in the mail from other churches. Sometimes they'd send a check, sometimes they would just send words of encouragement, but I would say my whole church was a big sense of help. And I worked at the clinic up there, and I would say my doctor at the time was very sensitive and very caring, and my coworkers as well. There were other nurses that I worked with, and especially the nurses were just super, super sensitive. I had 6 weeks off of work after that, or I think I took 6 weeks off after that. And I had been going through a tough time at work right before my husband died, and thankfully that all got put on the back burner and was taken care of after the fact. But between my church and my coworkers and my family too, my mom and dad were all very supportive. My mom was in Idaho at the time and my dad in Minnesota, but just, everybody worried about me a lot.
And I think a lot of prayers too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We're talking with Bonnie Sorenson, my guest on A Widow's Heart. We're so glad that you are here, and finding out too, after so many episodes of this podcast, that there are many listeners who have lost a spouse, many who are on a different grief journey, many who are maybe going through depression, and they find hope through these stories that just seem at the time so awful. It's the club no one wants to be a part of, being a widow. Right. And I find the more widows that I talk to, and I think you mentioned too that you had some really good friends, and you can talk about stuff that you can't tell anybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's those kind of people that just understand. And I'll just share, my husband and I struggled a lot in the ministry. Sometimes you're isolated, even though we're out there in front of everybody. Our church saw us fight at times, and
it's a marriage.
Yeah, it's a marriage, and sometimes we feel like we can't get the help we need because it'll put a blemish on the ministry. And I'm hoping that my story can help change that as well, because we all need help and support where we're at. And I'm just thankful that the church was there for us and there for me after Brian passed away.
You know, this is a unique situation. I don't think I've spoken with and heard the story of a pastor's wife before. And can you tell us, how we can help our pastors at our churches? Because I think when I was a very young Christian and stuff, I thought you were my 911.
Yeah.
I was like, you're available to me 24 hours a day. Yeah. And if I've got to, of course you're not going through a catastrophe. I'm going through all of them, and you've got to be there for me. And that is so not true. Right. So how can we reach out to help you as you are helping and shepherding so many?
First of all, just recognizing that the pastor and the pastor's wife are people just like you. We have real lives. We have real struggles. Yeah, I feel like God holds us to a standard, and we try our best to live up to that standard. But it's when people hold us to people's standards that it becomes much more difficult. And we as ministers and as people that are in leadership and in ministry, we need grace just like anyone else. And I think just reaching out, just words of encouragement, just supporting and being able to recognize that sometimes there needs to be a boundary. And I think even in the 10 years, 11 years that has passed, it's gotten better. But my husband, ministry came first a lot of times when really more of the focus could have been on our family, and he was getting much better. I will tell you that, especially as the younger kids got older, he would take time off to go watch them in their games or take time off, and giving pastors grace to realize that God is first, their family, and then their ministry. Yeah. And when those are in order, the people are going to be taken care of. Oh. God's going to minister to the church, and the church will thrive when the pastor is able to put the Lord first, able to have things in the right order, and God's going to give strength for those moments when there's a crisis. Sometimes crises need immediate attention, and you do get pulled away. And the pastor's family is, they suffer through that a lot. But also when things are in order on the front end of that, those times aren't as difficult.
Wise words. Words, Bonnie. That's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So before Brian went to heaven, and that was in January of 2012, and he was just 52 years old. Right. That's how old my husband was, too, when he passed away. His name was John, many years ago.
Wow.
But I'm learning more and more. It's like these guys, they're so young. You had already got your doctorate in nursing practice, a DNP, it's called, right?
Yes.
After your sixth child, and you became a family nurse practitioner. Where does this drive come from? Because that's just the beginning.
Right. I don't know. I think it's the type A firstborn, maybe. I have one brother, and I've always had that sort of type A driven, always wanted to be the best. I would tell you it's not always healthy because I've struggled with perfectionism, and, a B was not good enough. I got a B on a paper in college once, and I went straight to the instructor, the professor, and said, "Why did I get a B on this paper? I thought it was better." And she actually changed my grade because she didn't quite understand where I was going with my Anyway, that's me. So.
Well, I'm just thinking if I was a teacher and a child was like, not a child, but a student even in college, was that concerned about their grade and it was a B, it's like, okay, you get an A just for coming and saying something. So that was Grand Rapids where you and Brian had your ministry. And he passed away very unexpectedly, as you mentioned. So now you live a little bit south of the Twin Cities. Yes. And I'm just wondering, how did you get from Grand Rapids to the Twin Cities?
So I was only 48 when Brian died. And when I turned 50, my friends surprised me for a 50th birthday. I turned 50 that November. And then January, when it came up on the 2-year anniversary of Brian dying, I decided, you know what? I don't want to be alone anymore. I'm young, I'm healthy, and I'm ready to look. So I actually went on eHarmony and met my husband, John, within a couple of weeks. I sent him a smile, and of course he could see my profile, and that started a quote-unquote online relationship for a couple of weeks and led to some texts, and then I called him by accident almost and hung up on him. And I thought, what am I, 15? I mean, I got married at 18, so I had no idea how to even pursue a dating relationship. Long story short, it wasn't very long.
I know, it's
pretty funny. It's
what
pretty funny.
16?
And I will just say I had friends that I kept them in my loop. I said, you guys tell me if you have any concerns at all about him or anything I'm doing as a single mom, as a single person. And so they were very quick to keep me in line. And long story short, we first met down in the cities because he lives down here.
And it was a really kind of a unique first date, too, I understand.
Yes. So we met at Dick's Sporting Goods at the Burnsville Mall in public. And when I first saw him, I thought, I wasn't sure. And then he smiled, and he's a dentist, and it really has nothing to do with anything, but he had this wonderful set of teeth.
All right, good choppers.
Yeah,
check it off.
And so he had a whole wonderful weekend planned. We went to watch his son's basketball game that first night. And
wow.
Yeah. And then went for dinner, and the next morning we did a little Bible study in the church he was attending that next day, and he had planned a dance lesson. I had said I love to dance, but Brian, we just didn't dance. And so he planned a dance lesson.
So
I had this whole weekend.
out.
I was exhausted.
I know.
Events. Oh my gosh. But yeah, he was just, and his friends, it was funny. His friends were kind of hinted to me at the basketball game when he ran to go get a Coke or whatever. You know, he is really, really nice. And basically what they were saying to me is, if you hurt this man, we will hunt you down.
Yes. And on your side, though, I know you had kind of had a posse of your own that was looking out for you.
Yes. I had one friend, Jim actually did a background check on John.
Good.
And it's like, the guy doesn't even have a parking ticket. So yeah, finally he was able to travel up to Grand Rapids, and we met at one of my close girlfriend's house, met her family for dinner. And of course, all her 4 boys were there just to scope him out. They're like, shoot, we don't find anything wrong with him. He's going to take you away from us, isn't he? And so we got engaged just a few months later in April, and got married the next August. So it was very, very quick. But when you're 50, and I had a list.
You're still a type A, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm still a type A. I had a list of, okay, do you have this? What about this? What about this? You know, what is your medical history? What kind of surgeries have you? I mean, it was like...
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. And it was a whirlwind. It took my kids a long time, my older kids especially, a little bit of time to adjust. But God was in it, and I think for the first time in my life, I actually stood up for myself and said, "This is for me. I know that God has this."
You know, I was 43 when John passed away too, and I got remarried 9 years ago. And you know, it's a unique perspective for each person who has lost their spouse.
Yes,
I know some are just like, no way, no way, no way, and it's okay if you don't find someone.
Right.
But again, some that I've talked to and urged to get counseling get kind of stuck, you know, too. And that's a whole different story. You know, it's just that, you know, you move forward, you don't move past it,
right?
You know, but again, I think it's just a point to just mention too, and I'd love your perspective on that too, when to look for help. I was just thinking of that as someone who's like, no, I can't date because I'm still grieving, you know, 15, 16, 20 years later.
Right.
They're always in your heart.
Yeah.
And not that you have to move forward, but how do you help yourself through the grief?
Right.
Especially as a pastor's wife.
It was very, very difficult. And I would say for me, when you talked about getting counseling and getting help, that is probably my biggest regret through the whole process, was that I didn't seek out help and counseling sooner. I had good support, but just to meet with that one non-biased person who really doesn't know me or my situation, and just dealing with things from my past, you know, we won't get into all that here, but it's just some stuff that I needed help with, that I did get help with eventually after I got remarried. Yeah. But the importance of seeking out even a coach or a mentor or a professional counseling, all those things were things that I wish I would have done sooner.
Yeah.
Even grief counseling, I wish I would have done sooner.
Absolutely. We're talking with Bonnie Sorenson, more of her incredible story and how God is at work in her life and the amazing things that you are accomplishing. But I just want to mention quickly, too, our sponsor is called Wings for Widows. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I have heard of them.
Have you? They just came forward when we first started our podcast and said, we really just want to get the word out about what we do. And it's specifically financial assistance. They come alongside those who have lost their spouse, widows and widowers. And as I've said in the past, too, it's like they can help you with money management. Maybe you don't know what's going on, but also if there's a bankruptcy or if you have millions of dollars, it's free financial advice from Christian financial advisors. And I just can't recommend them enough. It's wingsforwidows.org.
That's so incredible, because I was blessed enough in my life where I got my big fat degree, I always say God knew I needed that, because a pastor's family, thankfully we had bought our own house not that many years before that. Otherwise, I would have had to move.
Yeah.
And
so many do, and they have no idea what their financial situation, especially when someone passes away as suddenly as Brian did.
Exactly. And I think that is so needed, because especially in ministry, when there's a lot of stay-at-home moms and a lot of people that aren't working outside of the home, and a lot of women, that's a huge calling. And that would be so awesome to be able to have help like that, for people to be able to reach out and get that much needed help.
Yeah. It's wingsforwidows.org. Okay. So now you have gotten remarried to John.
Yes.
Yes. And you're still pursuing degrees and professional masters in pastoral care and counseling. It's so impressive. I mean, I think you're encouraging so many people about what they can do.
Yeah.
You're not defeated.
Yeah, we're not defeated. We can move on. Life doesn't end. You know, I hauled my youngest daughter. My youngest son went off to college. He's now a doctor. I'm super proud of him. My youngest daughter's getting married.
And you have a pastor too, right?
Yes.
In your family?
One of my middle kids is actually my pastor right now. So that's my son, Jed McGuire, pastors at Canvas Church in Northfield. So that's where we go to church.
You got your ministry classes at North Central, correct? Yeah.
Yep. When we first moved to the cities, I got remarried and we moved down here to the cities, and with my youngest daughter, Brianna. And John's youngest son was in and out of the house. His ex-wife, he was divorced, so his ex-wife is very much in the picture. And so Jack was back and forth between the two houses. But I knew even then that there was this nudging. You know, when I got remarried, I felt like I didn't want to marry a minister again, honestly. That was my first thought. I didn't need, ministry was probably done, but God said no. So I took a leadership course at North Central right after we got married, and went through some stuff. For those of us in middle age, you know exactly, menopause was not as easy as I thought it was going to be.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I thought that women who went through it and complained about stuff were crazy. And now I'm like, please forgive me if I ever poo-pooed you going through it, because those hot flashes and emotions and anxiety and depression. I mean, it's all a real thing.
Too much information, but at that particular time for me, I was in a staff meeting here at KTIS, and I just remember looking around, and I actually had to excuse myself. I said, I guess they'd be pretty much shocked if I just took all my clothes off and ran and jumped in the snowbank.
Yeah, no, it's bad. And we're talking for me every hour. In fact, the hot flashes were starting when I married John, and I'm like, I'm just apologizing ahead of time, because this is the real deal. It's not fun. So but there was a lot of emotional things, and I knew that God was not done with me, and I needed to heal inwardly from a lot of past hurts, and a lot of, my parents had a rough life. Like I said, they were divorced several times from each other, actually, and before it was all said and done. And so it was a little tough, but I knew that God was not done, and just began to question God. Okay, what is it? What am I supposed to do? And the big thing for me at that point was, where do I fit? Yeah. I was sort of, I don't want to say I was the queen of the church, but, you know, when you were a pastor's wife, everybody knew you, and I had some good relationships, and we moved to a new place, and I know no one. Yeah. John had all the friends, and I didn't. You know, mine were still up north. And so figuring out where I fit and where I belonged, and plus going through the change added up to be a
I love that we talked about that, by the way, too, because there are so many ladies going,
and it's
preach.
So, and I kind of wear my thoughts on my sleeve, or where my thoughts come out my mouth most of the time. So, but it was really tough. So I just did decide to pursue a master's degree in pastoral care and counseling. I also became a licensed minister. I didn't do that until after Brian passed away. It was just something that I felt like I didn't need, or it never came up when we were working together. So I am a licensed minister, and I got this degree in pastoral care and counseling, and I know that God's not done. I have a heart for women. I have a heart for women in ministry, even men in ministry. You know, right after Brian died, knowing what the ministry is like, and everybody wants to feed you, and literally feed you, and being able to say, I'm sorry, I'm, just not eating the brownies today or whatever, just health and wellness.
The food shows up, doesn't it?
Yeah. And just health and wellness and mental health and going through COVID and all of this. God's got something for me and just beginning to step into it. And I was crying out to the Lord one morning and listening to KTIS as I usually do. And the song by Torrin Wells, God's Not Done, came on. And I wept. I'm on my way to work and I'm crying and I'm in the car and this song comes on. It's like, okay, God, what is it that you have for me? It's not too late. There's more. God's just been moving and I keep learning and keep growing and it's happening.
Well, here's what Bonnie has been up to. There is a website you should check out. It's called MirabellaCoaching.com, reflecting God's love in health and wellness, taking all of that knowledge, all of that, the nursing and the loving on people and the pastoral divinity degrees. It's all coming together. And on her website, it's Proverbs 27:19 says, as water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. Your ministry is a combination of all of that, right?
Yes. I have to give a shout out to the women's group up north in Grand Rapids. They called themselves Mirabella, which means beautiful reflection. And that's what my heart is that I can reflect beautifully God in my life. I just have a heart to help others be able to figure out how to do that as well.
That is so good. Again, we're spiritual and pastoral care, health and wellness coach. What a great combination. And then it says you're a Praise Moves instructor. What is that, Bonnie?
Yes. So Praise Moves. So Dr. Lorette Willis was one of my coaches, and she is a fabulous lady. And I sought her out because I was searching for a Christian alternative to yoga or fitness. And Praise Moves is exactly that. It's a Christian alternative to yoga. It's a fitness ministry that uses postures that look a lot like the poses in yoga, but each posture has a specific scripture that goes with it.
Wow.
So you're not only moving, but while you're holding the posture and stretching, while you're holding the posture, you're saying a scripture out loud. And as an instructor, you invite your students to say the scriptures as well. So it's a really neat fitness ministry, especially for those of us that are, for any age, but stretching is so important.
Oh, let me tell you again, along with, we mentioned the M word, menopause. And a lot of us are in this sandwich generation too, where our parents are kind of, getting older and we're taking care of them. And I just see, I love my mom and dad so much, but you have to use it or lose it. You have to take care of yourself, and you have to exercise. And you know what? And here I say you have to, because I love how you explain, because this body that we have, this temple, we need to take care of it and make it something that you want to do. Now, I use the have to.
Right. You have to make something that you want to do, and God can change your desires. You can change your thoughts and change your feelings. And I'm really into retraining the brain and becoming all that you can be, spirit, soul, and body. We're all this three pieces. Some people would say spirit, soul, mind, and body, but it's huge. One part is connected to the other. And sometimes we get a little bit out of balance. We might be a little bit too much into the fitness, or might be spiritually we can be healthy, but if we don't have a healthy body, we're not completely healthy. We're not whole.
Well, again, Bonnie Sorenson, it's just been amazing talking to you. MirabellaCoaching.com. Now, let's say someone's listening right now and they're, something is clicking with them and they want to get out of being stuck, or one of those areas isn't so great as far as spirit, soul, mind, and body.
Yes.
What can you do for them? How can they get a hold of you?
Yes, and I'll have to update my website. So that website is only a couple months old. It came out of a day of creativity, and it's like God is going to do this, and all of a sudden I have this website. But Bonnie.Sorenson at MirabellaCoaching.com. That's my email address. Reach out. and you can get hold of me that way. And I would love to hear your story.
And again, on this beautiful website that you told me you put together, quote unquote, just for fun. And we know that it's just because God told you.
Yes, yes.
Is, from the Message, 1 Thessalonians from chapter 5. May God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole, put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master, Jesus Christ. The one
Amen.
who called you is completely dependable. If he said it, he'll do it.
Amen.
I have tears in my eyes.
I know.
That is so beautiful.
I was like, that is such a good scripture. God's word is so amazing.
It is.
It's so amazing.
What encouragement do you have for someone who is listening right now who may be just not in a place to move forward and just doesn't feel it's worthwhile and they're in such a place of grief? Can you just lift them up?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I pray for you. You know, even just someone out there, I just lift you up before the Lord in the name of Jesus. And I would say, don't listen to the lie that says, I'm too far gone, or there's nothing left I can do. The grief is too great. I can't handle it. It sounds harsh, but it's a lie from the enemy. And I just believe that God is not done with any of us, and he's not done with you. And just reach out. If it's not to me, reach out to a friend. The other thing that I learned is just being grateful and developing a gratitude practice. You know, we've heard that a lot, but man, it's so true. Get a journal, write down, even if you're in the throes of grief, write down 3 things a day that you were thankful for with your spouse, or even that you are thankful for in this very moment, that the sun is shining, that the grass is green, that I can walk on 2 legs, or that I have a child that's healthy, or for my grandchildren. You know, those are some things that show up in my gratitude journal. And that would be just one word of encouragement, because a thankful heart is a happy heart and a fulfilled heart. God is so good, and he's been faithful to me. And it has been a long journey. Like we said, It's been 11 years since my husband passed away. And I feel like I'm only now, even through all the ministry, I'm now finally walking into what I know God had planned for me from the beginning. And it's an amazing thing when we give our lives to God. And you don't need to go through a tragedy to let God show himself faithful. He can do it right where you're at now.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming today.
You're so welcome.
We will stay in touch. You're an amazing, amazing soul.
I'm honored to be here, Pam. Thank you so much.
Well, until we meet again, I hope you just take good care of yourself, treat yourself with kindness, and know that God loves you. And I hope that you can check out some of our other podcasts on the Wow God Podcast Network. It's at wowgod.com. There are God stories like crazy. There's A Widow's Heart, of course, my podcast, A Widow's Heart. All of the episodes are there. My friend Andy has a wonderful podcast for guys. You might want to have that favorite guy in your life. Guys in your life, take a listen to Manly with Andy. There's also Joe and Tara Buchanan's wonderful Behind Our Smiles. It's married couples talking about, ups and downs of marriage and Wow God stories, all part of the Wow God Podcast Network. And when you financially support the network, you allow us to create more podcasts and episodes where every story, every struggle, and every journey gives listeners a chance to say, wow, God. And we hope maybe you would consider a monthly gift of $40 or any other amount when you click the donate button at wowgod.com. By the way, A Widow's Heart grateful for the support of Wings for Widows and is part of the Wow God Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts, and at wowgod.com. Wow, that's a lot of information. Anyway, thank you for listening. We'll talk soon.